Of those, somewhere between 6% and 30% might be infected with bovine TB. That means that more than 1,000 badgers could be totally healthy.
The Welsh Assembly Government claim a badger cull is the most effective way of tackling bovine tuberculosis, a disease which caused 12,000 cows to be slaughtered in Wales in 2009.
My view is that they're looking at the wrong solution, because not only are they going to add to their costs, but they're going to divide communities, and they're going to lead to a situation whereby BTB is actually going to spread even further.
The cull will take place over a 5-year period in the intensive action area, mainly comprising North Pembrokeshire.
My name is Dr. Gavin Wheeler. My family have a 250-acre farm in the heart of the intensive action area. We have been farming there for the last 50 years with organic beef and sheep. We have a large number of badger sets on our land, and we have never had any problem with bovine tuberculosis with our animals. So we are very strongly opposed to having our healthy badgers slaughtered in order for new badgers, quite possibly infected, to come back on and recolonise the farm, quite possibly bringing tuberculosis with them.
The Welsh Assembly Government have published several reports and sent leaflets to every household in the intensive action area, attempting to justify the proposed cull.
In the literature that WAG have put out to inform the public, there are a number of bits of information which are highly dubious. They, for instance, repeatedly claim that the level of TB in badgers in the intensive action area is over 30%.
In fact, the level of TB in badgers in Pembrokeshire has been measured in the Badgers Found Dead survey. There they found only 15% of badgers had TB, which is much, much lower. And in fact, in the intensive action area, the results of that have been published on the Welsh Assembly website as part of the consultation on this cull, and there only 2 of the badgers found in the intensive action area were found to have TB, where they could find a definite result, which was something like 5% of the badgers for which they had a positive result.
The Welsh Assembly Government claims scientific evidence shows that culling badgers can substantially reduce tuberculosis in cattle. But critics say the main scientific study on the effectiveness of a cull does not support this claim.
The big trials done in England, the randomised badger culling trials, concluded very clearly that culling badgers cannot meaningfully contribute to the control of TB in Britain. So we feel we ought to be accepting that scientific advice and not spending yet more money on another cull in this area.
Using the results of the randomised badger culling trials, it shows that initially a cull will actually make matters worse. You only get a benefit in the longer term. So for the first few years, you can expect increased herd breakdowns, far more cattle having TB.
This is due to what scientists call the perturbation effect.
When you cull badgers, the badgers scatter across the countryside, they spread the disease, and they're actually more likely to catch TB. So in the trials in England, they actually doubled the level of TB in badgers by culling.
You end up with more infected badgers after culling than you had before. That's a scenario we don't want.
This is the second attempt by the Welsh Assembly Government to implement a badger cull in Wales.
The first attempt last summer was stalled at the last minute by the Badger Trust and their judicial review, which they won at appeal. If you're going to kill a wild species like the badger, their contribution to eliminating the disease has to be substantial. So that wasn't proven, because at that time the culling figures that they had suggested that culling could only contribute 9% reduction of bovine TB. So the Welsh Assembly Government have come back now with a new order which tries to address all the problems that the judges highlighted.
The government now claim in 10 years' time, if we only remove badgers, we should have reduced tuberculosis in cattle in the intensive action area by at least 28%. So, are badgers to blame for the spread of tuberculosis?
Any mammal can catch it and pass it on, but cattle do seem to be very susceptible. They're very numerous, there are lots of them, and of course they gather together in large herds, so they spread the disease very easily. And with modern farming, they are carted around the country a lot.
There are a number of papers which establish quite conclusively that cattle movements is a significant issue. Farmers visit markets all over the country in the interest of buying cattle. So it's no longer a local operation. It is genuinely a nationwide operation now.
So when TB spreads from one area to another, it is almost entirely down to cattle movements, and the badgers can then only maintain it. So you do want to reduce the level of TB in badgers, but it is a problem caused by the cattle. At the end of the culling trials in Britain, the second half of the conclusion was that cattle controls on their own were the best way to combat tuberculosis in cattle and were fully capable of doing the job on their own. They recommended many cattle measures which could be put into place, many of which are still not implemented even in the intensive action area. We know they work. They worked in Britain earlier when we had a huge TB problem in the first half of the last century, and at that point the attested herd scheme was able to reduce tuberculosis to the point where we felt we had eliminated it entirely from the UK. That was obviously optimistic, but it showed how effective that programme was. That scheme worked without any systematic badger culling whatsoever. Scotland now has official TB-free status, and they achieved that again without any kind of wide-scale or legal badger cull. They achieved that by cattle controls, and they are maintaining their TB-free status by controlling the movement of cattle.
There's also the issue with dairy herds. There's a higher prevalence in dairy herds. You could liken a dairy cow to a marathon runner who's running a marathon every day. So that's how much stress their body's under. And bovine TB has to have a compromised immune system in an animal to actually manifest itself. And if you think of the scale of some of the dairy herds now, this is one of the reasons we think why bovine TB has become actually increased since 2000. Because dairy herds at that point, the average number of cattle in a dairy herd was about 120. Since then, we've gone up to herds of 300 to 1,000 cattle.
Increasing numbers of animals are now housed indoors. Close proximity is an ideal situation for spreading the disease, which is spread as an aerosol. With the indoor housing, of course, there is the problem of accumulated slurry.
That's actually the infection coming from the cattle herd into the dung. We know it can last in slurry for months. It's then spread on the land. The cattle then eat the grass where the infection has been spread out.
Recommendations have been made that if you spread slurry on a field, you shouldn't then graze it for another 2 months. But TB can last for 6 months under some circumstances.
So this is one area where a lot could be done to encourage farmers to keep slurry longer before you spread it on the farm. Compost it maybe, that's very good at sterilising the slurry, and this could do a lot to reduce the spread of TB in any area which has a problem. Obviously this is not popular with farmers. They are already suffering. We do accept that TB is a huge problem for farmers and that farmers have worked very hard to try to deal with this. But the fact is that cattle controls are the most effective measure for preventing TB.
The TB infection in badger population has to be dealt with. Culling won't do it, so you need an alternative. Vaccination is the obvious possibility.
But the Welsh Assembly Government state, at the moment, there is limited scientific evidence on how effective this would be in reducing tuberculosis in badgers.
The injectable badger vaccine is currently being trialled in England, in Stroud. This trial has gone very, very well so far. So here now, today, since April or so this year, we could have been vaccinating badgers.